The Pittsburgh Steelers had everything in front of them and let it slip away in the worst possible moment. A win against the Cleveland Browns team that came into the game with 3 victories on the season would have locked up the AFC North title in 2025. Instead, what unfolded was a 13-6 loss that felt heavier than a normal defeat, because now the entire season funnels into a do-or-die matchup against the Baltimore Ravens on Sunday Night Football. When you put the film on and really study what happened, it becomes clear that this wasn't about one bad bounce or one unlucky break. This was a game the Steelers actively gave away through decisions, missed chances, and an approach that never matched the reality on the field. The loss hurt, there's no denying it, but the black and gold are still alive. If this content represents how you feel, leave a like on the video and drop a comment below to support the channel. The moment is tough, but our voice never stops. Here we go. The first thing that jumps off the screen is how pass-heavy the Steelers chose to be, despite all the signs pointing in the opposite direction. Cleveland entered this game as one of the best pass defenses in football by efficiency, while being closer to league average against the run. On top of that, Pittsburgh was missing not just one, but 2 major offensive weapons. DK Metcalf was out serving the first game of his 2-game suspension, removing the one receiver who consistently draws safety help and changes coverage structures. Then, very early in the game, Darnell Washington went down with a fractured forearm. Losing Washington mattered more than it might seem at first glance because he's one of the most dangerous yards-after-catch players on the roster at tight end and a tone setter in the run game. Even with those absences, the run game was working. Jaylen Warren and Kenny Gainwell combined for 4.7 yards per carry, consistently moving the ball and keeping the offense on schedule. And yet, nearly 2/3 of the Steelers' offensive plays were passes. Watching the film, it felt like the offense drifted away from what was actually succeeding. Aaron Rodgers appeared to take control at the line of scrimmage and lean into a pass-first mentality that didn't fit the circumstances. Against a top-5 pass defense, on the road, without your top receiving options, choosing to throw that often is a recipe for exactly what happened. Drives stalled, pressure mounted, and the Steelers kept putting themselves into low-percentage situations. Even before the score forced them to throw late, the imbalance was already there. This wasn't about chasing points, it was about a flawed plan and execution that never adjusted to what the game was telling them. That leads directly into the second major issue, missed opportunities. The Steelers entered Browns territory 7 times and came away with just 6 points. No touchdowns, 2 field goals. That is simply not winning football. There were punts from near midfield, conservative decisions that shrank the margin for error, and execution failures in critical moments. A 4th-and-1 situation ended with a deep ball to Scotty Miller instead of a higher percentage conversion. A field goal was missed. Red zone chances dissolved into nothing. When you move the ball that consistently and fail to finish, you're inviting disaster. The defensive side had its own moments that could have changed everything. Early in the game, Kyle Duggar had a clear interception opportunity that turned into the Browns' only touchdown when Harold Fannin came down with the ball and scored. Nick Herbig later dropped a pick-6 that would have flipped the entire game. Those are 7-point swings that don't show up as defensive failures in the box score, but they matter. Still, the defense did more than enough to win. They tackled well, pressured the quarterback consistently, and gave the offense chance after chance in the 4th quarter with quick stops. Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig, Cam Hayward, and the rest of the front generated pressure even without TJ Watt, and the secondary, led by Joey Porter Jr., held up in man coverage. The Browns scored 13 points. That should be a win. Where frustration really builds is in the situational decisions and throws. Aaron Rodgers had control of the offense and too often chose the wrong matchup, targeting Marquez Valdes-Scantling repeatedly in the end zone against Denzel Ward, especially given MVS's well-documented issues with drops, was a baffling choice. Adam Thielen was open underneath on key plays. Kenny Gainwell was effective when used, yet the ball kept going to lower percentage options in the biggest moments. That disconnect between what the defense was giving and where the ball went defined the night. Now the Steelers are staring at a season-defining game against Baltimore without DK Metcalf again. Everything is compressed into 1 week. The margin for error is gone. The film from this Browns game shows a team that can move the ball, a defense that can win games, and an offense that sabotaged itself with poor choices and missed execution. The question isn't whether Pittsburgh has enough talent, because they do. The real question is whether they can learn from this loss quickly enough to survive what's coming next. After watching this game back and breaking down every missed chance and questionable decision, do you believe this loss was more about the game plan, the quarterback's decisions, or simple execution when it mattered most? What makes this moment so tense is that everything we just talked about isn't theoretical anymore. There's no time to slowly correct tendencies or hope things clean themselves up over a month. The Steelers now have exactly 1 week to prove they understood what went wrong against Cleveland and whether they are capable of fixing it under maximum pressure. Baltimore already showed earlier this season that they are perfectly comfortable daring Pittsburgh to throw the ball, loading the box, and forcing the offense to win outside. The difference then was DK Metcalf. He punished one-on-one coverage, stretched the field, and forced the Ravens to pay for their aggression. That safety valve is gone again, and that reality changes everything about how this offense has to function. If the Steelers come out against Baltimore with the same mindset they had against Cleveland, the result could be even uglier. The Browns showed a clear blueprint: sit in man coverage, trust your corners, and challenge Aaron Rodgers to consistently make the correct decision without his top weapons. Too often against Cleveland, Rodgers defaulted to trust and familiarity rather than efficiency. That showed up in the repeated looks to Marquez Valdes-Scantling despite the matchup, and in the reluctance to take what the defense was willingly giving underneath. Against the Ravens, those mistakes are magnified because Baltimore thrives on chaos. They bait quarterbacks into forcing throws and then capitalize when patience disappears. The path forward for Pittsburgh is actually very clear on film, even if it's not easy to execute. The offense has to run through Jaylen Warren and Kenny Gainwell, not just as runners but as extensions of the passing game. Screens, checkdowns, angle routes, and design touches have to be a priority. When the Steelers got the ball into their hands against Cleveland, the offense moved. That has been true all season. Ignoring that strength in favor of low-percentage deep shots without the personnel to win them is self-sabotage. The run game doesn't just control the clock, it slows down aggressive defenses and keeps pass rushers honest. Adam Thielen and Pat Freiermuth also have to become the foundation of the passing attack. The film showed Thielen consistently finding soft spots in zone coverage and winning on third down with intelligence rather than speed. Freiermuth was nearly unstoppable on seam routes during 2-minute situations, yet was largely invisible until the game demanded desperation. That cannot happen again. These are the receivers who understand leverage, spacing, and timing, and those traits matter far more than raw athleticism in games like this. If Rodgers is serious about efficiency and ball security, those two need to be his primary reads, not secondary options. There's also a looming personnel question that could quietly define this game: who becomes the vertical threat by necessity, not reputation. Baltimore will stack the box. They will challenge the Steelers to beat them over the top. Roman Wilson may be the only receiver on the roster right now who has consistently shown the ability to stack corners and separate deep. The chemistry with Rodgers hasn't always been there, but the film shows opportunities where Wilson won and never got the ball. If Pittsburgh wants any chance of keeping the Ravens honest, someone has to make them pay downfield, even if it's only once or twice. Without that threat, everything condenses, and the offense suffocates itself. Defensively, the Steelers actually have a foundation they can trust. The tackling has been strong. The pass rush has been productive even without T.J. Watt. Alex Highsmith has stepped into a leadership role up front, and Joey Porter Jr. has developed into a legitimate shutdown corner in man coverage. The defense has shown it can survive and even thrive in high-pressure situations, but that only matters if the offense holds up its end of the deal. No defense can be asked to defend short fields and constant 3-and-outs against a team like Baltimore and still win. This is why the Cleveland loss feels so heavy. It wasn't just a missed opportunity in the standings. It was a warning. The Steelers were shown exactly what happens when they ignore their own identity and chase an offense they are not built to be right now. Against the Ravens, there will be no margin for stubbornness, no patience for repeated mistakes, and no sympathy for missed chances. Either this offense adjusts, simplifies, and plays to its strengths, or the season ends on national television. At this point, everything is on the table. Accountability starts with Aaron Rodgers' decisions at the line of scrimmage. It extends to how Arthur Smith structures the game plan. It shows up in who gets targets when the game is on the line. The answers are already on the film. The question is whether the Steelers are willing to act on them when it matters most. What keeps pulling you back to this moment is the feeling that the Steelers are standing at a crossroads created entirely by their own choices. Nothing about this situation feels random. The defense has evolved over the last month into a unit that can survive high-stakes football. The offensive line has quietly become one of the more reliable parts of the team, especially on the right side, where the young players have shown real chemistry and physicality. Even at left tackle, Dylan Cook has put together a stretch of games that simply cannot be ignored, holding his own against elite pass rushers and doing his job at a level that gives the offense a fighting chance. These are not small developments. These are foundational pieces that teams build playoff runs on. And yet, all of that progress risks being overshadowed because the offense continues to fight itself. The Cleveland game exposed a deeper issue than just play selection. It highlighted a lack of situational discipline. Time and again, the Steelers found themselves in moments where a simple decision could have extended a drive, flipped field position, or applied pressure back onto the Browns. Instead, the choices leaned toward hero ball, deep shots on short yardage downs, low percentage fades in must-score situations, targets funneled toward receivers whose strengths do not align with those moments. Against average teams, you might survive that. Against disciplined, physical teams like Baltimore, you won't. This is where the conversation inevitably circles back to leadership on offense. Aaron Rodgers has full control at the line. That power comes with responsibility. The offense is designed to give him options, to allow him to diagnose coverage and put the team in the best possible play. Against Cleveland, that advantage became a liability. Too often, the checks led away from what was working and toward what looked good on paper but failed on the field. The film doesn't lie. When the Steelers stayed patient, leaned on the run, and took what was available, they moved the ball. When they chased explosives without the personnel to consistently win those matchups, drives died. Baltimore will test that discipline immediately. They will disguise coverages. They will rotate late. They will dare Rodgers to outthink them snap after snap. The answer cannot be forcing throws outside or ignoring the middle of the field. The answer has to be rhythm, balance, and trust in the parts of the offense that have actually delivered results. That means Jaylen Warren and Kenny Gainwell touching the ball early and often. That means Adam Thielen and Pat Freiermuth being featured, not forgotten. That means accepting 5- and 6-yard gains as victories, not failures. There's also a psychological edge at play here. The Ravens know exactly what this game means to Pittsburgh. They know the Steelers are coming off a loss that should have been a celebration. They know the pressure is heavier on the sideline wearing black and gold. How the Steelers respond in the first quarter will tell you everything. If they come out pressing, forcing throws, and abandoning balance, the outcome will feel familiar very quickly. If they come out controlled, physical, and deliberate, this becomes a fight. What makes this so compelling for fans is that the margin between those two outcomes is thin. The Steelers are not overmatched. They are not talent poor. They are flawed, but every team playing this late in the season is. The difference between advancing and going home will come down to whether this offense can finally align its decisions with its reality. The Browns game was the warning shot. The Ravens game is the final exam. What makes this stretch even more intense is that the Steelers no longer have the luxury of debating hypotheticals. There's no if they clean this up over the next few weeks or if the offense finds itself by January. This is January football now in everything but name. Every snap against Baltimore will either validate the belief that this team can adapt under pressure or confirm the fear that they are stuck repeating the same mistakes when the lights get brightest. When you step back and look at the full picture, the most frustrating part of the Cleveland loss is how clearly the answers were sitting there on tape. This wasn't a game where the Steelers were physically overwhelmed. It wasn't a game where the offensive line collapsed or the defense got gashed repeatedly. It was a game where the offense consistently chose the harder path instead of the smarter one. That matters, because smart football is what separates teams that survive these moments from teams that spend the offseason replaying them. Baltimore is going to force Pittsburgh to prove it can stay patient even when nothing explosive happens early. The Ravens are comfortable winning ugly. They are comfortable turning games into grinded-out battles where every yard feels earned. If the Steelers fall behind by a score or even two, the temptation will be there to abandon balance and chase points quickly. That is exactly the trap Cleveland set, and Pittsburgh walked right into it. The challenge now is whether this offense has learned that lesson or whether the same instincts take over again. Another layer to this is trust. Trust in the run game. Trust in the middle of the field. Trust in receivers who may not be flashy but consistently get open. Against Cleveland, it felt like trust was misplaced at key moments. Targets went to players because of familiarity rather than matchup advantage. Decisions were made as if the offense still had weapons it simply didn't. Against Baltimore, that disconnect between perception and reality will be punished immediately. The Ravens will not miss the opportunities Cleveland left on the field. Defensively, the Steelers are going to give themselves a chance. That's the one thing that feels stable right now. The tackling has been sharp. The pass rush has remained effective even with personnel changes. Joey Porter Jr. has shown he can erase a side of the field, and the front has proven it can generate pressure without needing everything to go perfectly. But the defense cannot be asked to be perfect. They cannot be asked to win a 9-6 game every week. At some point, the offense has to meet them halfway. This is why the coming game feels like a referendum on identity. Are the Steelers willing to win games by being disciplined, physical, and methodical, or will they continue trying to force an offensive identity that doesn't match who they are right now? The Cleveland game suggested there is still resistance to accepting that reality. Baltimore will not allow that resistance to linger. For the fans, that's what makes this so difficult and so compelling at the same time. You can see the path. You can see how this team could win. You can also see how quickly it could unravel if the same habits resurface. The margin between those two outcomes is razor thin, and it all comes down to decisions made in the moment, not talent on the roster. There is also a long-term weight attached to how this game is handled, even if nobody inside the building wants to say it out loud. Moments like this shape how a season is remembered and how certain decisions are judged moving forward. The Steelers are not rebuilding. They are not experimenting. They are trying to win now. That means the standard changes. Losses like Cleveland are no longer just setbacks. They become evidence, fairly or unfairly, of whether this group truly understands itself. What stood out most on film wasn't panic, but hesitation masked as confidence. The offense didn't look lost. It looked stubborn. There's a big difference. Stubbornness shows up when a team keeps trying to prove it can win a certain way instead of accepting how the game is unfolding. Against Cleveland, the Steelers kept insisting on throwing into unfavorable looks even as the run game quietly kept producing. That tells you the issue wasn't ability, it was choice. And choice is the one thing that has to change immediately. Baltimore thrives on exposing that exact flaw. They don't just beat you physically, they beat you mentally. They want quarterbacks checking into the wrong looks. They want coordinators second-guessing themselves. They want impatience. If the Steelers come out against the Ravens trying to prove something instead of simply winning, the game will tilt fast. If they stay grounded, lean on what works, and accept ugly football, they can absolutely be in this game deep into the fourth quarter. Another element that can't be ignored is momentum inside the game itself. Against Cleveland, the Steelers had multiple moments where a single clean decision could have flipped the emotional balance. A converted 4th and 1, a touchdown instead of a field goal, a takeaway turned into points. Those moments didn't go their way, and the offense never recovered emotionally. Against Baltimore, those moments will come again. The difference is that this time, there may not be another chance after you miss them. This is where leadership is tested in real time. Not speeches, not preparation, but the ability to slow the game down when everything feels urgent. That responsibility sits squarely on the